Joining me in the studio now are the Phoenix Players Company, who are taking Southsea's Trinity Church Theatre back to the 19th century, telling the tale of Pip and Estella in a story better known as Great Expectations. Well, thank you for joining me, guys, and I see you've come in costume, some of you as well. And maybe just for those at home that may have heard of Great Expectations but aren't quite familiar with the story, just give us a flavour of what it's about.
Okay, well, it's basically a life story. It's the story of Pip, who starts as a boy and grows to manhood, and it's you wouldn't really describe him perhaps as the hero of the story, because he actually becomes a snob. He falls in love with young Estella, and then later on that's resolved when they become adults. We've got the older Estella here too, but during the course of this, he starts off as a young blacksmith, and he has a very loving brother-in-law, Joe Gargery, and he's brought up very well. He's got rather a strict sister who's his guardian. So these various things happen in his life. But what happens is he essentially starts off as quite a humble character, and then he becomes a snob because of his love for Estella. He also meets a wonderful character called Miss Havisham, who I'm sure most people have heard of, who's this rather mad old lady dressed as a bride, and so his great ambition becomes that he wants to be a gentleman rather than working class. But so eventually he gets this mysterious fortune. He assumes that it's from this mad old lady, Miss Havisham, but it actually turns out to be from this character who's known as Magwitch, who he first meets in a graveyard, a convict, so the lowest of the low, who later is transported to Australia and actually makes his fortune sheep farming and comes back.
I was going to say, you don't look much like a convict. I say you're dressed quite dapper, actually. So.
Well, for the first half of the play, I will be dressed rather differently in my prison garb and covered in mud and speaking rather roughly to young Pip there. I've had to apologise to him in advance, threatening to cut his throat and things like that.
Yes.
But he's rather good. He brings me some whittles and he brings me a file to cut the iron that's on my leg, and then I think he basically forgets. Oh, I stole a pie as well. That very important. I think he basically forgets about me, and I reappear in his life later on, dressed as you see me now, and break the secret to him. And there's no little surprise on his part. Absolutely. And then he is really, really good to me, tries to save my life and everything. Wonderful.
Yes.
Excellent. And talking of fantastic costume, we've got some amazing costumes sat behind as well. And I mean, for yourself, you're sharing the part with this young lady here. So, yes. I mean, how do you find the gel? Do you have to spend a lot of time together beforehand so that you kind of get the similar mannerisms, similar way of speaking?
Well, it's so well written that it's consistent through young Estella into older Estella. So the character maintains its consistency. But Charlotte and I have actually worked together before, so we are familiar with each other. So yeah, we know each other, don't we? Yeah.
And I understand actually, sort of in this case, Pip and Estella, the younger versions in real life, are brother and sister.
They are actually brother and sister.
So I suppose that means with the chemistry on stage, that makes it a little bit easier when they're sort of messing around and interacting with each other. And as we said before, the Great Expectations, it's a well-known story. It's one that a lot of people will be familiar with, but you've made, obviously, every adaptation is slightly different. So what might we see that be slightly different in your version?
Well, I think you'll see certain characters which often get cut out of this. I think most people are familiar with Great Expectations, if not from the book, from the old black and white David Lean classic.
Okay.
But that's very, very truncated. All sorts of fascinating characters have been cut out, obviously for brevity of being able to tell the story in an hour and a half. Yeah. We've got 2 hours, and we've still had to cut out all sorts of wonderful characters, who just never get to see the light of day. But
unless somebody wants to be there for 5 hours watching it.
Well, actually, it would. It's like the RSC did a full, faithful adaptation of Nicholas Nickleby, which is probably about the same length as the full Great Expectations, and I think it was about 8 or 9 hours long,
Wow.
something like that. They had to show it over 2 consecutive nights. You know.
Well, for a more, shall we say, palatable version,
yes. Yeah.
when and where can we find you? How do we get involved? How do we come and see it?
Right, okay. Well, I've brought a flyer here just to remind myself of the dates in case I forgot, which wouldn't be great. Right, it starts on Wednesday the 31st of May and goes through to Saturday the 3rd of June. The evening performances being at 7:30 p.m. We've also got a matinee on the Saturday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. and that's in Albert Road at the Trinity Church Theatre.
Perfect. Well, guys, thank you very much for coming to see us, and thank you for being in costume. I think that's amazing.
Pleasure.
Great, thank you.
No worries, thank you very much.